The night was quiet, almost too quiet for a small town that usually had the soft hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, and the distant sounds of people finishing their day. Streetlights flickered gently, casting pools of yellow light onto the empty roads. Windows in houses were lit warmly, showing families winding down, talking softly, or watching television. Everything seemed calm, peaceful, and ordinary. But that peace was about to be challenged. Far down the main road, the silence was broken by a low, rumbling sound that grew louder and louder. It started as a distant hum and quickly turned into the unmistakable roar of motorcycles. A group of bikers appeared around the corner, speeding recklessly, their engines vibrating through the night air. They rode in a tight formation, leaning into the turns, laughing and shouting at one another. These were not casual riders. Everyone in the county knew about them. They had a reputation for causing trouble, for testing limits, for pushing boundaries, and tonight, they were ready to push them even further. The bikers didn't notice the pedestrians who quickly stepped out of the way. A young couple walking their dog paused and watched nervously as the motorcycles sped past. A small group of teenagers on the corner froze, their curiosity battling with fear. The bikers were bold, brash, and confident, believing that the quiet town offered no resistance to their antics. They had caused problems before, breaking into shops, scaring people, and stealing whatever caught their attention. And tonight their energy was wild, almost unpredictable. At a nearby diner, a few late-night customers noticed the sound. A waitress behind the counter paused mid-step, gripping a coffee pot. She whispered to a coworker, worry written across her face. The town had seen these bikers before, and every encounter had ended with minor chaos. Nothing serious, but enough to leave people shaken. The bikers weren't violent without reason, but they thrived on fear and on proving they could dominate spaces where others felt safe. They had learned that in this town, most people would step aside and let them pass. Unseen by the bikers, a figure watched from the shadows near a quiet alley. The man stood tall and calm, his presence steady and unassuming. He was not just another person wandering the streets. He had seen people like the bikers many times before. He knew their patterns, their arrogance, and their recklessness. He had learned that people who thought they were untouchable often revealed their true nature when pushed just enough. He didn't need to act yet. Observation was the first step, and tonight he was patient. He watched them take corners too fast, laughing as they almost lost control, revving their engines with reckless pride. The bikers were riding fast now, their confidence growing with each turn. One of them yelled over the roar of the engine, making a joke that only the others understood. They didn't notice the old couple on the corner, walking slowly, holding hands. The bikers swerved suddenly, barely missing them, and laughed even harder. To them it was all fun, a thrill ride with no consequences. But for the couple it was terrifying. Their hearts raced as the motorcycles passed, and they held each other a little tighter, whispering to stay calm. As the bikers disappeared around another corner, a car pulled quietly to the side of the road. Inside, the driver watched the scene unfold through the rearview mirror. It was the same figure who had been observing from the shadows. He adjusted his position slightly, making sure he could follow without being noticed. He didn't need to rush. He knew that the bikers' confidence would lead them into a mistake, that their arrogance would create an opening. He had seen it happen countless times, and he knew that when it did, his presence would be enough to stop the chaos without escalating the situation. The bikers eventually slowed near the town's small park. They parked their motorcycles in a haphazard line and began showing off to one another. Some did tricks, popping wheelies or spinning in tight circles, while others shouted encouragement or criticism. The park, normally quiet at this hour, was now alive with noise, laughter, and the smell of gasoline. The few people still walking nearby stepped back, unsure of how to react. It was clear that these bikers felt they owned the night, that no one would challenge them. The quiet town seemed powerless against their energy. Meanwhile, the observer stayed hidden, watching each movement carefully. He noticed the subtle signs that most people wouldn't see. The biker who was leaning too far back on his bike, the one gripping the handlebars a little too tightly, the tension in their shoulders as they tried to impress each other. These small details told a story. They showed where the danger might rise and where intervention could be most effective. He didn't need to shout or confront them yet. Patience was his ally. He knew that people who act recklessly often create their own opportunities to be stopped. Back at the diner, the waitress kept glancing out the window, her concern growing. Other patrons whispered quietly among themselves, sharing stories of previous encounters with the bikers. Some said the group had left the town in chaos before, leaving broken fences, damaged vehicles, and frightened residents behind. Others spoke of near accidents and moments of fear that lingered for weeks. Everyone agreed on one thing: the bikers thrived on the idea that no one would stop them. They thrived on fear and the belief that they were untouchable. But tonight things were different, even if no one at the diner realized it. The bikers decided to leave the park and continue their ride. They mounted their motorcycles with a swagger, engines roaring louder than before. They laughed at the emptiness of the streets, confident that no one could challenge them. But the observer followed silently, making sure to keep a safe distance while keeping them in view. He could have approached at any moment, but he knew timing was critical. The bikers needed to make a move that crossed a line, something that would give him the justification to step in and stop the chaos effectively. As they rode through the town, the bikers continued their reckless behavior. One of them skidded near a curb, narrowly avoiding a parked car. Another shouted a challenge, daring his friends to take the next turn faster. Their laughter echoed off the buildings, filling the night with a mixture of thrill and fear. People in their homes peeked through curtains, hoping the noise would pass without incident. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of excitement and unease. At a quiet intersection, the bikers suddenly slowed, deciding to show off their skills. They took turns revving their engines, performing quick spins, and racing briefly in a straight line. It was dangerous, thrilling, and completely uncontrolled, and that was exactly what the observer had anticipated. He could see the patterns, the predictable mistakes that would come next. He didn't need to act just yet. He waited, calm and focused, ready to intervene when the moment was right. Finally, one of the bikers, carried away by his own confidence, attempted a particularly risky maneuver. He leaned too far into a turn, the bike wobbling dangerously. His friends cheered, oblivious to the real danger. The observer saw it immediately. This was the moment that could lead to disaster. If no one entered, the bikers, feeling unstoppable after speeding through the town streets, decided to take their chaos a step further. They roared toward a local convenience store, their engines vibrating through the quiet night. The store was small but well known in town, a place where everyone stopped for late-night snacks or emergency items. It was one of those places where the clerk knew most of the regulars, and at this hour, only a few customers lingered inside. The sudden screech of tires and the loud rumble of motorcycles outside drew uneasy glances from everyone present. The bikers didn't enter quietly. They barged in, laughing and shouting, their presence filling the small space with tension. The clerk, a man in his 50s who had seen his fair share of trouble, froze behind the counter. He had heard stories about this group before, and his hands shook slightly as he tried to stay calm. The bikers demanded snacks and drinks without even pretending to pay first. One of them tossed a candy bar into the air, catching it with a careless flourish, while another banged his fists on the counter to show dominance. The other customers looked around, unsure if they should try to intervene or just stay quiet and wait for the commotion to end. Outside, the quiet figure who had been following them from a distance observed silently. He stayed hidden, watching every action and noting the behaviors of each biker. He didn't need to rush in. He knew that at some point, their recklessness would create the perfect moment for intervention. He had dealt with situations like this too many times before and understood that timing was everything. Inside the store, the bikers' antics escalated. One of them began knocking items off the shelves, laughing at the crashing sounds and the way the few remaining customers jumped in alarm. The clerk tried to calm them, asking politely to stop, but the bikers ignored him, thinking their boldness gave them control over everyone in the store. Their confidence was growing with each passing second, and it was clear they believed that nothing could stop them now. The clerk noticed a young boy who had come in with his mother. The boy's eyes were wide, fear and curiosity mingling as he watched the bikers. His mother held him close, whispering that everything would be okay. The presence of innocent bystanders didn't faze the bikers, though. In their minds, it was all part of the thrill. They laughed louder, revved their engines again, and continued to throw items around. The store, usually a place of quiet and familiarity, had become a stage for chaos. The observer outside remained calm, knowing that rushing in blindly could make the situation worse. He could see the pattern forming. The bikers were reaching the point where their actions would no longer be sustainable. Their overconfidence was blinding them to the consequences that were quickly approaching. Patience was key. He adjusted his position, staying in the shadows while keeping a full view of the store and the surrounding street. The town might not have anyone else ready to act, but he was prepared. After a few minutes, the bikers decided the store wasn't enough. They mounted their motorcycles again, determined to take their chaos to the streets once more. The engines roared louder, filling the night air with an unsettling rhythm. They planned to race through the town square, a place that at this hour was usually empty and peaceful. The few people who remained on the streets quickly moved out of the way, sensing danger but powerless to stop it. The bikers' arrogance and recklessness had turned the town into a stage for their audacity. As they sped toward the town square, the bikers performed stunts, swerving dangerously and leaning into turns with a wild confidence. Their laughter and shouts echoed off the buildings, alarming anyone who happened to be awake. It was as if they were daring the town itself to challenge them. But the observer was already there, quietly keeping pace, unseen and unnoticed. He knew every move they would make because he had studied this type of behavior before. One of the bikers attempted a daring wheelie while going through an intersection, almost losing control. His friends cheered, thinking it was impressive, while a few passers-by ducked for safety. The observer took careful note. He didn't need to intervene yet, but he was ready for the moment when it would become necessary. This was a dangerous game and the stakes were high, but he understood that the bikers themselves were pushing toward a limit they hadn't anticipated. The town square, usually empty at this hour, became a playground for the bikers' antics. They circled in loops, racing each other and shouting at anyone who dared to look at them. A small group of teenagers who had been watching from a distance held their breath, unsure whether to call for help or remain hidden. The observer, still hidden, realized that the bikers' behavior was escalating faster than expected. Each stunt, each reckless maneuver, was pushing them closer to a serious mistake. Suddenly, one of the bikers skidded near a curb, narrowly avoiding a parked car. His friends laughed at the close call, but the observer knew how dangerous it had been. If someone had been walking nearby or if a vehicle had been passing, the results could have been disastrous. He stayed silent, carefully tracking each movement, calculating the exact moment when intervention would be necessary. His presence alone, though unseen, was already influencing the situation. The bikers were confident, yes, but confidence built on recklessness can crumble quickly. One biker, determined to show off more than the rest, attempted a sharp turn at high speed. His bike wobbled, his balance precarious, and he let out a laugh that was more nervous than he realized. The observer took note of the pattern. This was the moment when consequences could appear. He didn't need to rush in and create chaos. All he needed was to be ready when the bikers' actions naturally reached a tipping point. The danger they created for themselves and the town was growing with every passing second. The bikers continued their reckless show, their energy almost palpable, their overconfidence blinding them to the reality around them. Meanwhile, the few townspeople who had dared to watch from behind closed doors whispered quietly to each other, sharing nervous glances. The streets, normally calm and familiar, had transformed into a scene of chaos, and the tension was thick in the air. No one could have predicted the intervention that was above the bikers, feeling unstoppable after their ride through the town square, decided to push the limits even further. They turned onto narrower streets, weaving through tight corners, their engines roaring loudly in the quiet night. Each biker tried to outdo the others, revving their engines higher, leaning dangerously into turns and performing risky stunts. Their laughter and shouts filled the streets, echoing off the brick walls and empty alleyways. They were completely absorbed in their own world, oblivious to the consequences of their actions and to the presence of someone who was quietly observing every move. The observer, still hidden in the shadows, followed at a careful distance. He had studied the bikers' patterns over the last hour and knew that their confidence would soon lead them to a critical mistake. He didn't need to rush in or make himself visible yet. Patience was key, and timing would determine how effectively he could stop them without unnecessary conflict. He noted the subtle signs of imbalance, overconfidence, and recklessness in each biker. He saw the way their muscles tensed as they tried to impress one another, the way their eyes flickered with both excitement and distraction, and the way they underestimated the danger around them. All of these were small signals that, when combined, painted a clear picture of impending trouble. At the edge of town, a small park offered a brief respite from the winding streets. A few residents, including a couple walking their dog and a teenager sitting on a bench, had noticed the bikers' antics and watched in a mix of fear and fascination. They whispered among themselves, worried that someone could get hurt. The bikers, caught up in their own excitement, paid no attention to the people around them. They believed the empty streets gave them complete freedom. But the observer knew better. He had seen similar situations before, where thrill-seeking behavior escalated into dangerous mistakes. The townspeople might have been powerless to stop the bikers, but he was ready to act at the right moment. One biker, attempting to show off more than the others, decided to perform a risky wheelie while navigating a tight corner. His bike wobbled slightly, and he let out a nervous laugh that barely masked his uncertainty. His friends cheered, oblivious to the danger. The observer noted every detail. This was the moment when intervention would soon be necessary. The biker's overconfidence, combined with his lack of control, made an accident almost inevitable if left unchecked. The streets of the town, usually quiet and familiar, had transformed into a dangerous playground. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that made it hard for anyone passing by to see clearly. The bikers continued their stunts, weaving in and out of alleys, narrowly avoiding parked cars and street signs. A few windows had opened and residents peeked out, watching nervously. They had seen these bikers cause trouble before, but nothing like this. The energy in the air was tense, a mix of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. Everyone who witnessed the scene could feel that something was about to happen, something that could change the night completely. The observer followed silently, moving with precision and awareness. He knew the bikers' patterns and could anticipate their next moves. Each risky maneuver, each loud rev of the engine, each careless laugh brought them closer to a moment where their actions could have serious consequences. He didn't need to confront them yet, but he remained ready. His calm presence, though unseen, was preparing the stage for an intervention that would prevent harm and restore safety to the town. As the bikers approached a narrow intersection, one of them tried to cut across at high speed. The bike skidded slightly, the tires struggling to maintain grip. His friends shouted encouragement, urging him to go faster, to take more risks. The observer noted the imbalance and the potential for an accident. He knew that a collision or fall could injure someone, and he prepared mentally to act the moment it became necessary. The bikers, in their excitement, were blind to the danger. They didn't realize that their overconfidence had brought them right to a point where someone skilled and alert could safely intervene. Nearby, a small group of teenagers watched from a safe distance. They whispered among themselves, expressing both awe and fear. They knew the bikers had a reputation for causing trouble, but seeing it up close was something entirely different. One of the teens suggested calling the authorities, but the others hesitated. They weren't sure if the police could arrive in time, and they feared escalating the situation. Little did they know that help was already there, quiet and ready, observing the bikers' every move. The bikers continued, performing more daring stunts. One attempted a sharp turn at high speed, his bike tilting dangerously. Another revved his engine and raced ahead, narrowly avoiding a parked car. Their laughter was louder now, filled with adrenaline and overconfidence. But the observer remained calm, understanding that their recklessness had limits. He could see the exact point where their behavior would naturally reach a critical moment. When it did, his presence would ensure the situation ended safely. In the town square, which they passed again, the bikers circled and revved their engines, showing off to one another. A few late-night pedestrians hurriedly crossed to the other side, hoping to avoid the bikers entirely. The observer watched them carefully, noting the increasing danger in their movements. He didn't need to intervene yet, but he mentally prepared for the moment when action would be necessary. The bikers' arrogance and thrill-seeking behavior had brought them closer to a serious mistake than they realized. One biker, trying to impress his friends, attempted a risky jump over a small ramp set up near a construction site. His bike wobbled in midair, and he let out a sharp laugh that quickly turned into a gasp as he struggled to land safely. The others cheered, but the observer noticed the signs of potential disaster. The ramp was unstable, the landing area uneven, and the speed too high. Any miscalculation could lead to a crash, and he was ready to prevent harm if it occurred. His calm, precise awareness allowed him to anticipate the bikers' next moves and respond safely. The bikers, still caught up in their own excitement, continued down the streets, their engines roaring and tires skidding on the pavement. They believed they were in control, that the bikers, still riding recklessly, had pushed their confidence to its limit. Their engines roared through the narrow streets, tires skidding on corners, as they continued to test each other in the town's quiet roads. They laughed and shouted, oblivious to the danger they were creating and unaware that their actions had been quietly monitored from the shadows. Each stunt and risky maneuver had pushed them closer to disaster, and now they were teetering on the edge of something far more serious than they realized. The observer, who had been following them throughout the night, knew the critical moment had arrived. He didn't need to act hastily, but he understood that careful timing would ensure the bikers would be stopped safely and effectively. He watched the way each biker moved, the tension in their shoulders, the quick glances at one another for approval, and the unsteady laughter that occasionally betrayed their fear. All of these small details revealed the growing danger of their actions. The town square, usually deserted at this hour, became their playground once more. The bikers circled the open space, revving engines, showing off stunts, and laughing at their own bravery. The observer stayed at a safe distance, concealed but attentive. He knew the exact point where intervention would be necessary to prevent injury and maintain control. He had seen situations like this unfold countless times, and he understood that recklessness without consequences often escalates until someone skilled intervenes. Nearby, a small group of residents watched from behind the windows of their homes. Some whispered quietly to one another, worried about what might happen. A few had considered calling the authorities, but they were unsure if help would arrive in time. Little did they know that the quiet presence following the bikers was already in position, ready to act when the bikers' thrill-seeking behavior finally reached its tipping point. One biker, emboldened by the cheers of his friends, attempted a daring jump over a small ramp placed near a construction site. His bike wobbled in midair, and he let out a sharp laugh that quickly turned into a gasp as he struggled to land. The others cheered, unaware of the real danger. The observer took note of every detail, prepared to step in at the exact right moment to prevent an accident. His calm presence, though unseen, provided a sense of control over the unpredictable chaos. The bikers, oblivious to the danger, continued their ride through the town streets. They performed stunts, raced each other, and laughed at their own audacity. Each movement carried more risk than the last, and the potential for injury or property damage was high. Yet, the observer remained calm, following them with careful attention, ready to intervene with precision when the situation demanded it. He knew that patience and timing were far more effective than rushing in prematurely. As they approached a tight corner, one biker misjudged the turn, the tires skidding dangerously. His friends shouted encouragement, unaware that the small miscalculation could lead to a serious accident. The observer noted the imbalance and the growing risk. He didn't need to make a move yet, but he prepared himself mentally for when it would become necessary. Every reckless action was a signal, and he had learned to recognize the exact moment when intervention would be most effective. The streets of the town, usually quiet and calm, had become a stage for chaos. Streetlights flickered, casting shadows that danced on the pavement as the bikers weaved through the roads. Residents peered out from windows, whispering to each other, watching the dangerous spectacle unfold. The bikers laughed and shouted, caught up in the thrill, oblivious to the serious consequences that could follow. The observer continued to follow silently, blending into the shadows, understanding that the bikers' overconfidence would soon lead them to a point where safety and control were necessary. One biker, determined to impress the others, attempted a risky maneuver on a narrow street lined with parked cars. His bike wobbled, his balance precarious, and a gasp escaped his lips before he corrected himself. His friends cheered, unaware of the near miss, while the observer noted every detail. This was the point where the biker's recklessness had reached its peak, and intervention would soon be required to prevent an accident. The observer's calm and precise attention ensured that he was ready to act effectively, without creating panic or escalating the situation. The bikers continued their chaotic journey, weaving through streets and alleys, testing the limits of their motorcycles and their own skill. Their confidence was high, but so was the risk. The observer followed closely, staying hidden but prepared. He understood that their overconfidence and thrill-seeking behavior would inevitably lead to a mistake, and he was ready to prevent any harm. His presence, though unseen, provided the necessary control to keep the situation from spiraling out of control. As they returned to the town square, the bikers circled the open space once more, performing stunts and revving their engines. A few residents had gathered quietly to watch, holding their breath and whispering nervously. They could sense that the situation was reaching a critical point. The observer, still hidden, prepared mentally for the moment when intervention would be required. He knew that the bikers' actions had created openings for a safe and controlled resolution, and he was ready to step in with authority when the time came. One biker, trying to outdo the others, attempted a high-speed turn that went slightly wrong. His bike wobbled dangerously, and he let out a sharp laugh that quickly turned into a gasp. His friends cheered, oblivious to the danger they were all in. The observer noted the exact moment when his intervention would be necessary. He didn't need to rush, didn't need to shout. His calm presence and timing would ensure that the biker's recklessness would be stopped without injury and without escalating the situation. Nearby, the few residents who had ventured out to watch whispered among themselves, expressing both awe and fear. They could see the bikers' dangerous behavior, but they had no idea that someone skilled and attentive was already in position to intervene. The observer remained calm, tracking the bikers' every move, calculating the precise moment when action would be necessary. His preparation ensured that when the bikers reached the point of inevitable recklessness, he could step in safely and effectively. The bikers, still caught up in their own excitement, continued performing stunts, racing and shouting. Each movement carried more risk than the last, and the tension in the streets grew. The observer stayed close enough to intervene, but far enough to remain unseen. He understood that their overconfidence and thrill-seeking would create a situation where his presence could prevent accidents and restore order. His calm and precise observation provided the control necessary to manage the chaos. As the bikers approached another hot intersection, one of them misjudged the turn, the bike skidding dangerously. His friends shouted and laughed, unaware of the risk. The observer, prepared and calm, recognized that the critical moment for intervention had arrived. Every reckless action had led to this point, and the bikers were about to meet someone capable of ensuring their safety and the safety of the town. The night continued, filled with the roar of engines, laughter, and the occasional squeal of tires. The bikers were lost in their own thrill-seeking world, believing they were in control. The observer followed silently, knowing that the moment for action was approaching. His calm presence, careful observation, and precise timing would ensure that the bikers' reckless behavior would be addressed without harm or unnecessary conflict. Finally, one biker attempted a maneuver that went slightly too far, his bike wobbling on the uneven pavement. His friends cheered, unaware of the danger. The observer was ready. He had tracked every move, anticipated every stunt, and prepared for the exact moment when his intervention would be necessary. The bikers, still oblivious to the unseen presence, were about to encounter a calm, precise, and skilled authority that would restore order, ensure safety, and teach them a lesson they would not forget. The town's quiet streets once again were about to be restored to peace thanks to careful observation, timing, and intervention. Nothing could touch them. But the observer knew the truth. Their overconfidence had created openings, mistakes waiting to happen, and moments that could quickly escalate into danger. He stayed close enough to intervene, but far enough to remain unseen, letting their actions naturally reveal the point at which he would step in. Nearby, residents watched with a mix of awe and fear. They whispered to one another, speculating about what might happen next. Some thought the bikers would continue without incident, while others feared someone might get hurt. The observer, however, remained calm. He had seen countless situations like this where reckless behavior seemed unstoppable until a skilled presence stepped in. He knew that the right moment for action would soon arrive, and when it did, the bikers' thrill-filled night would meet a force they could not ignore. As the bikers approached another intersection, one of them attempted to cut across sharply, misjudging the turn. His bike wobbled, the tires barely gripping the pavement. His friends laughed and shouted, unaware of the danger they were in. The observer, still hidden, noted every detail. This was the critical moment, the point at which intervention would be necessary to prevent injury and restore order. The bikers' overconfidence had carried them too far, and the consequences of their actions were becoming inevitable. The night stretched on, filled with the sound of revving engines, laughter, and the occasional screech of tires. The bikers were caught in their own world, blind to the potential consequences of their behavior. The observer followed silently, anticipating every movement, prepared to act at the exact moment required. He understood that sometimes the most powerful intervention is quiet, precise, and timely, ensuring safety without unnecessary confrontation. As the bikers continued their reckless journey through the town streets, the observer remained calm, steady, and focused. He had studied their behavior, predicted their moves, and prepared for the moment when their actions would reach a tipping point. Every stunt, every laugh, every reckless turn brought them closer to the moment when he would ensure that the night ended safely. The town's safety, the well-being of its residents, and the lesson the bikers were about to receive all depended on his careful observation and readiness. The bikers, still laughing and shouting, had no idea that their reckless spree was being carefully monitored by someone who could stop them, without escalating the situation. Their confidence, built on arrogance and thrill-seeking, had created an opportunity for intervention that was both necessary and inevitable. The night, full of tension, excitement, and danger, was about to meet a calm, steady, and skilled presence that would restore order and teach the bikers a lesson they would not forget. Yet to come, the quiet presence that had been watching and calculating every move. After circling the square several times, the bikers paused briefly to discuss their next moves. Some suggested riding even faster through the streets. Others joked about testing the limits of their motorcycles. They laughed at the perceived thrill of danger, unaware that their recklessness had attracted someone capable of ending their spree without confrontation. The observer noted their planning, their eagerness to continue, and the arrogance that had brought them to this point. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles once more, the observer prepared mentally. He knew the exact moment when action would be necessary. He didn't need to shout, he didn't need to scare them. He only needed to be in the right place at the right time, ready to ensure the safety of everyone involved. The bikers, still believing they were untouchable, had no idea that their thrill ride was being monitored by someone patient, skilled, and aware of the potential dangers. The night stretched on, the bikers' energy slowly reaching its peak. They performed stunts, raced each other, and tested the limits of their motorcycles in the town's empty streets. The observer followed quietly, maintaining a steady pace, never breaking his calm demeanor. He could see every mistake before it happened, every risk that had been underestimated. Patience, observation, and timing would be key to stopping the chaos safely. Finally, one of the bikers, carried away by his own bravado, attempted a stunt that was far riskier than the rest. He leaned too far into a turn, wobbling dangerously as his bike threatened to tip. His friends cheered, unaware of the serious danger. The observer knew the critical moment had arrived. He would need to intervene, but with precision and calm authority. The bikers had pushed the night to a point where consequences were inevitable, and the town's safety now depended on careful, decisive action. As the observer followed closely, he remained invisible to the bikers. They continued to act as if nothing could stop them, as if the night belonged entirely to them. But every reckless maneuver had brought them closer to a moment of reckoning. The quiet, patient figure who had been tracking them all night was ready. He understood that sometimes the most powerful action is silent, calculated, and precise. And tonight, the bikers' thrill-filled night would meet the calm, unshakable presence of someone who could restore order without a single word of unnecessary conflict. Ned, someone could get hurt, property could be damaged, and the town could pay the price for a night of reckless thrill-seeking. But the observer remained calm, knowing that when the moment came, his presence and actions would be enough to stop the chaos and restore order. As the bikers continued, the observer stayed close enough to watch, far enough to remain unnoticed. He understood that these young men believed themselves invincible, that no one would dare challenge them. But tonight that belief would be tested. Their arrogance and overconfidence were leading them straight into a situation they could not control. And when it came to a head, the quiet figure watching from the shadows would ensure that the town remained safe, that no harm would come to the people or property that these bikers had threatened all evening. The night carried on, with the bikers oblivious to the steady presence tracking their every move. They believed in their own freedom, in their power over the empty streets, and in their ability to escape consequence. But the observer knew better. He understood human nature, he understood risk, and he understood that the line between fun and disaster was thin and fragile. He had learned over the years that it was not enough to hope for safety. Sometimes intervention was necessary, and when it was done correctly, it could prevent tragedy without a single word of confrontation. As the bikers sped past another quiet street, the observer followed, blending into the shadows. His calm determination contrasted sharply with their chaotic energy. He didn't need to hurry. He didn't need to yell. He only needed to be ready. And tonight, readiness was everything. The bikers had no idea that their night of reckless thrills was being quietly monitored, that every turn and every stunt was being noted. They were unaware that a moment of reckoning was approaching, a moment that would teach them a lesson they would not forget. By the time the bikers reached the outskirts of the town, the observer had already predicted their next moves. He understood their patterns, their weaknesses, and their overconfidence. He knew that one mistake could escalate quickly, that a single misstep could turn a fun night into disaster. But he was patient, knowing that the bikers themselves would create the opportunity for intervention. And when that time came, he would be there, calm, prepared, and ready to ensure that the night ended safely for everyone.